She was only 50 yards from home when she disappeared forever. 9-year-old Mia Thompson carried her favorite doll, her pink backpack bouncing against her small frame as she walked the familiar path she'd taken hundreds of times before. But on this warm Tuesday afternoon in May 2001, something went terribly wrong in the quiet town of Millfield, Pennsylvania. The school bus had dropped Mia off at exactly 1:15 p.m., just like every other day. Mrs. Henderson, who lived across the street, was watering her garden when she saw the little girl with blonde hair skip down Maple Avenue, humming a tune only she could hear. Mrs. Henderson waved, and Mia waved back with her free hand, clutching her beloved doll Sarah with the other. That wave would haunt Mrs. Henderson for the rest of her life. By 1:30, Mia should have been at the Garcia's house next door, where she always went after school until her mother Linda finished her shift at the diner. Maria Garcia had prepared Mia's favorite snack, peanut butter crackers and apple juice, and was watching through her kitchen window for the familiar sight of the little girl's approach. But Mia never arrived. At first, Maria thought maybe Mia had gone straight home. Perhaps Linda had gotten off work early. But when she called the Thompson house, the phone rang endlessly in empty rooms. A cold knot formed in Maria's stomach as she realized something was wrong. The 50-yard between the bus stop and the Garcia house might as well have been 50 miles. In that short distance, in broad daylight, in a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone, a 9-year-old girl had simply vanished into thin air. When Linda Thompson rushed home from work after Maria's frantic call, she found her daughter's bedroom exactly as Mia had left it that morning. Bed unmade, stuffed animals arranged on the pillow, tomorrow's outfit already picked out and laid across the chair. The silence in that room was deafening. Within an hour, police cars filled Maple Avenue. Officers knocked on every door, searched every yard, and questioned every neighbor. But as the sun began to set over Millfield, one terrible truth became clear. Mia Thompson was gone. Detective Sarah Collins had worked missing persons cases for 12 years, but something about Mia Thompson's disappearance sent chills down her spine. Children didn't just vanish in broad daylight. Not in Millfield. Not without someone seeing something. The first 48 hours were crucial, and Collins knew it. She assembled the largest search team the small Pennsylvania town had ever seen. Volunteers poured in from neighboring counties, hundreds of people armed with flashlights, calling Mia's name until their voices gave out. Linda Thompson hadn't slept since her daughter disappeared. She stood in her front yard, clutching one of Mia's sweaters, watching search teams disappear into the dense woods that surrounded their quiet neighborhood. Her husband Jake, Mia's stepfather, organized volunteer groups with military precision, his voice steady even as his hands shook. "She's out there," Linda whispered to anyone who would listen. "She's scared and she's calling for me, and I can't hear her." The searches expanded day by day. Within a week, every square mile within a 10-mile radius had been covered. Dogs followed scent trails that led nowhere. Helicopters with thermal imaging cameras swept over the forest canopy, but the thick Pennsylvania woods kept their secrets hidden. Then came the first lead that would change everything. 2 teenage boys, Marcus and Tyler, came forward on day 8. They'd been skateboarding near the elementary school that Tuesday afternoon when they saw something that hadn't seemed important at the time: a little girl getting into a dark red car without estate plates. She looked like she knew the person, Marcus told Detective Collins, his voice barely above a whisper. "She wasn't fighting or anything. She's got in." Tyler nodded, remembering more details. The license plate was different. Not Pennsylvania. Maybe New York. The car headed toward the interstate. This single piece of information transformed the investigation from a local search to a multi-state manhunt. But as weeks turned into months, the red car proved as elusive as the little girl had supposedly carried away. The case files grew thicker, but the answers remained out of reach. 6 months after Mia disappeared, hope arrived in the most unexpected form. A confession that would tear the Thompson family apart all over again. David Morrison was a 28-year-old man with developmental disabilities who lived with his elderly mother on the outskirts of Millfield. He'd been caught inappropriately touching a child at the local playground, and when his mother confronted him, something unexpected happened. "I hurt that little girl," David sobbed to his mother. "The one everyone's looking for. I didn't mean to. I was trying to say sorry for being bad before, but she got scared and tried to run, and I couldn't let her tell on me." His mother, Margaret Morrison, was horrified. Her son's confession came pouring out in fragments. How he'd approached Mia 4 days before she disappeared to apologize for an earlier incident. How he'd followed her that Tuesday afternoon. How everything had gone wrong in an instant of panic. Margaret called the police immediately, and within hours, David was in custody. The confession seemed to solve a case that had haunted Millfield for months. David was committed to a psychiatric facility, and a year later, he was convicted of Mia's murder and sentenced to life in prison. Linda Thompson felt a mixture of relief and devastating loss. At least she knew who had taken her daughter, even if she'd never hold Mia again. The community could finally begin to heal, or so they thought. But Detective Collins never felt completely satisfied with the case. Something about David's confession bothered her. Inconsistencies in his story, details that didn't match the evidence, a timeline that never quite added up. She kept the file open in her mind, even as officially the case was closed. Years passed. David Morrison remained in prison, still maintaining his innocence after his initial confession. His court-appointed attorney filed appeal after appeal, claiming the confession had been coerced, that David's disability made him susceptible to suggestion, that he'd been interrogated without proper legal representation. Linda Thompson tried to move on, but how do you rebuild a life around such an enormous absence? She and Jake eventually divorced, not from lack of love, but because they grieved differently, and every shared glance contained the ghost of the daughter they'd lost. The town of Millfield slowly returned to normal, but Maple Avenue never felt quite the same. Mrs. Henderson stopped gardening in her front yard. The Garcia family moved away. The school bus route was changed so it no longer stopped where Mia had last been seen. But Detective Collins, now promoted but still haunted by unfinished business, kept thinking about that red car. The boys had been so certain of what they'd seen. Why hadn't they ever found it? 15 years had passed since Mia Thompson vanished from Maple Avenue. Detective Collins, now Chief Collins, was 3 weeks from retirement when her phone rang on a crisp October morning in 2016. "Chief Collins, this is Ranger Patterson from Woodland State Park. We've got a situation here that, well, you're going to want to see this yourself." Collins drove the winding mountain roads to the state park, her mind racing through possibilities. Ranger Patterson met her at the trailhead, his face pale and grim. "Mushroom Hunter found something this morning," Patterson said quietly. "Been calling your department all morning because of the clothing. Pink backpack, partially buried. And Chief, there are remains." The location was less than 15 miles from where Mia had disappeared, but in a dense forest that had been searched multiple times in 2001. How had they missed this? Collins knelt beside the shallow grave, her trained eye taking in details that would forever be burned into her memory. Mia's pink backpack, faded but recognizable. Fragments of the dress she'd worn that last day. And finally, heartbreakingly, a small plastic doll with blonde hair. Sarah, Mia's constant companion. The medical examiner confirmed what Collins already knew in her heart. After 15 years, Mia Thompson was finally coming home. But this discovery raised more questions than it answered. The location was nowhere near where David Morrison claimed to have left her. The condition of the remains suggested she'd been buried here shortly after her disappearance, not moved later. And most disturbing of all, preliminary forensic evidence suggested this wasn't where Mia had died. Collins had to make the most difficult phone call of her career. Linda Thompson, now remarried and living 2 states away, collapsed when she heard the news. 15 years of not knowing had been torture, but somehow the knowing was even worse. She was so close, Linda whispered through her tears. All these years, she was so close to home. The discovery meant David Morrison's conviction would be reviewed. It meant the case would be reopened. It meant starting over with 15-year-old evidence and faded memories. But most importantly, it meant finally getting justice for a 9-year-old girl who had trusted the wrong person on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. The reopened investigation brought new technology to old evidence. DNA analysis that hadn't existed in 2001 could now unlock secrets that had been hidden for 15 years. The results were shocking. DNA found at the burial site didn't match David Morrison. Instead, it connected to Marcus Chun, one of the teenage boys who had reported seeing Mia get into the red car. But Marcus had died in a car accident 5 years earlier, taking any answers with him to the grave. Chief Collins studied Marcus's old statement with new eyes. He'd been 16 when Mia disappeared, old enough to drive, old enough to know right from wrong. Had his detailed description of the red car been misdirection? Had he pointed investigators in the wrong direction to hide his own involvement? The investigation team dug deeper into Marcus's background. They discovered he'd had a history of behavioral problems that his family had kept quiet. His younger brother Tyler, now in his 30s, finally broke his silence after learning about the DNA evidence. Marcus wasn't right, Tyler admitted through tears during his interview. He scared me sometimes, the way he looked at little kids. I always wondered, but I could never prove anything. When Mia disappeared, and he came up with that story about the red car, I thought maybe he was just trying to help. I never imagined. But even this revelation didn't complete the puzzle. The DNA evidence suggested Marcus hadn't acted alone. There was a second profile, degraded but detectable. Someone else had been there when Mia was buried in those woods. Collins felt like she was solving a 15-year-old jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing. Each answer only led to more questions, and time was running out. Witnesses were dying, memories were fading, and evidence was deteriorating. The pressure on the investigation intensified when David Morrison's conviction was officially overturned. He walked out of prison a broken man, having lost 13 years of his life for a crime he didn't commit. His mother Margaret had died while he was incarcerated, still believing her son was a killer. The injustice of it all weighed heavily on everyone involved. Linda Thompson faced a terrible new reality. For 15 years, she'd known who had taken her daughter, even if she couldn't understand why. Now she was back to having no answers, only more questions and a deeper well of pain. The investigation stalled as winter approached. The second DNA profile remained unidentified despite running it through every database available. Whoever had helped Marcus Chun take Mia from Maple Avenue had managed to stay hidden for 15 years. But Collins refused to give up. Somewhere out, there was a person who knew exactly what had happened to Mia Thompson. Someone who had kept that secret through a decade and a half of investigations, false confessions, and wrongful imprisonment. Someone who thought they had gotten away with murder. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A routine traffic stop 3 states away. Officer Janet Rodriguez pulled over a speeding driver in Ohio and ran his license as standard procedure. The man seemed nervous, more nervous than a simple traffic violation warranted. When his name came back connected to an old missing persons case, Rodriguez decided to dig deeper. The driver was Kyle Morrison, David Morrison's older brother. He'd been questioned briefly in 2001, but had never been considered a serious suspect. Now 15 years later, advanced database searches revealed something that had been missed. Kyle had known Marcus Chun. They'd worked together at a summer camp the year before Mia disappeared. Kyle was 25 then, Marcus was 15. The camp had no record of any problems, but Kyle had left abruptly mid-season with no explanation given. Chief Collins flew to Ohio to interview Kyle personally. She found a man who'd been carrying a crushing weight for 15 years, And when confronted with the DNA evidence, his carefully constructed walls finally crumbled. "You don't understand," Kyle sobbed in the interview room. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Marcus said he just wanted to scare her, to teach her about stranger danger. He said his parents did that to him once when he was little, had a stranger approach him to show him how dangerous it could be." The story that emerged was more tragic than anyone had imagined. Marcus Chun, disturbed and manipulative even as a teenager, had convinced Kyle that they were going to stage a fake kidnapping to teach Mia about safety. Kyle, who struggled with his own developmental issues but wasn't as severely affected as his brother David, had believed Marcus's lies. "She was supposed to be gone for just an hour," Kyle continued, his voice breaking. "Marcus said we'd bring her back and tell her parents what happened, and everyone would praise us for teaching her an important lesson. But when we got to the woods, something in Marcus changed. He got angry when Mia started crying for her mom. He said she was being too loud, that she was going to get us in trouble." The rest of Kyle's confession painted a picture of horror and cowardice. Marcus had killed Mia in a moment of rage and panic. Kyle, terrified and in shock, had helped bury her body rather than face the consequences of calling for help. "I've lived with it every day for 15 years, Kyle whispered. "When David got arrested, I almost came forward. But Marcus convinced me that David would be better off in a hospital than in prison, that he'd get the help he needed. We told ourselves we were protecting him." "And when did Marcus die?" Collins asked. "I thought it was finally over. I thought I could live with the secret since he was gone and David was getting help. I never imagined they'd find her body. I never imagined any of this would come back." But Kyle's confession, while providing closure, couldn't undo 15 years of damage. David Morrison was free, but forever changed. Linda Thompson finally had answers, but had lost 15 years she could have spent grieving properly instead of living in limbo. The case that had destroyed so many lives was finally solved, but the victory felt hollow. Justice delayed had become justice denied for everyone involved. But then, just as everyone thought the Thompsons were about to get justice, Kyle Morrison's story began to crumble under scrutiny. Within weeks of his confession, his attorney filed motions claiming police coercion. Kyle retracted his statement, alleging he'd been pressured during interrogation and had told investigators what he thought they wanted to hear. "They kept me in that room for 12 hours, Kyle claimed in court. "They told me they already had enough evidence to convict me, that confessing was my only chance at a lighter sentence. I was exhausted and confused. I would have said anything to make it stop." The DNA evidence that had seemed so conclusive became muddied with questions about contamination and chain of custody. Kyle's connection to Marcus Chun, while real, didn't necessarily prove involvement in Mia's death. His lawyer argued that a troubled young man had been manipulated into a false confession by investigators desperate to close a cold case. Chief Collins watched in frustration as her carefully built case fell apart piece by piece. The forensic evidence was circumstantial at best. Kyle's confession had been the cornerstone of the prosecution, and without it, there wasn't enough to proceed. In 2020, 19 years after Mia Thompson disappeared, the district attorney made the devastating announcement that the investigation was being officially closed. There wasn't enough evidence to build a satisfactory case against any suspect. Kyle Morrison walked free, just as David Morrison had years before. Two men had confessed to involvement in Mia's death, and both had been released due to insufficient evidence. Linda Thompson sat in her living room, staring at the letter from the DA's office. After nearly 2 decades of searching for answers, she was back where she'd started, with nothing but questions and a grief that had calcified into something harder and more permanent than sorrow. The injustice ate at her. In 2024, against her lawyer's advice, Linda filed a civil lawsuit against Kyle Morrison, seeking damages for the emotional distress his false confession had caused her family. She wasn't after money. She wanted acknowledgement, accountability, some form of justice in a world that seemed to have forgotten her daughter. The court dismissed the case. There wasn't conclusive evidence proving Kyle's involvement in disposing of Mia's body. He remained legally innocent, regardless of what Linda believed in her heart. Chief Collins, long retired but still haunted by the case, visited Linda one gray autumn afternoon. They sat together in Mia's old bedroom, which Linda had preserved exactly as it was on that last morning in 2001. "I failed her," Collins said quietly, running her fingers along the edge of Mia's desk. "I failed you." Linda shook her head. "You found her. After 15 years, you brought her home. That means something, but it didn't feel like enough. Somewhere out there, a killer walked free. Someone knew exactly what had happened to Mia Thompson on that Tuesday afternoon, and they'd managed to escape justice for over 2 decades. The memorial at Woodland State Park grew over the years. Flowers appeared regularly, left by strangers who'd heard Mia's story and felt compelled to honor her memory. Linda visited every month, talking to her daughter as if she were still 9 years old, still waiting to come home. "I'm still looking for answers, baby girl," Linda would whisper to the wind. "I won't stop until I find them." The case files remained open in spirit, if not in practice. New detectives occasionally reviewed the evidence, hoping fresh eyes might spot something others had missed. DNA technology continued to advance, offering the possibility that someday, science might provide the answers that traditional investigation had failed to deliver. Mia Thompson would have been 32 years old now. She might have had children of her own, a career, dreams fulfilled, and new ones forming. Instead, she remained forever 9 in her mother's heart, frozen in time on a sunny afternoon when the world still made sense. The truth about what happened to Mia lies buried somewhere deeper than her body ever was. In someone's memory, in a moment of conscience, in evidence not yet discovered or understood. Justice delayed has become justice denied, but it hasn't become justice abandoned. Some cases are never truly closed. They live on in the hearts of those who love the victims, in the dedication of investigators who refuse to give up, and in the hope that someday, somehow, the truth will finally surface. Until that day comes, Mia Thompson's story remains unfinished, a mystery that has defined too many lives for too many years, a question mark that refuses to become a period. In a world that demands resolution, some stories resist conclusion, but that doesn't mean they lose their power or that the search for truth becomes meaningless. Sometimes the most important victories aren't convictions in courtrooms, but the refusal to let victims be forgotten, and the determination to keep seeking answers no matter how long it takes. Mia Thompson deserved better than the hand life dealt her, but her memory deserves nothing less than the truth, whenever and however it finally comes to light. The story you've just heard was inspired by the real case of Peggy Knobloch, a 9-year-old girl who disappeared in Lichtenberg, Bavaria, Germany in 2001. Like our fictional Mia, Peggy's body was found 15 years later in a wooded area near her home. Her case remains unsolved to this day. If you have any information about Peggy Knobloch's disappearance, please contact German authorities. Sometimes a fresh perspective or a long-buried memory can provide the key to finally bringing justice to families who have waited far too long for answers.